And we are on. So hi and welcome to the SUSE QA Tools workshop. Now we have a topic which is overdue to present in more detail because we finished one important saga, which was actually also a rather old one, which you can see by the time. So over 5 years ago, we wanted to streamline how openQA knows and can handle version control systems, in particular Git, obviously since very long time, or like since the beginning. We had been using version control within openQA to maintain test code as well as needles. However, in some parts it was more like, okay, there's some external component which ensures that in this checkout there are tests, and then openQA can read it if it finds this Git repo, and for needles it assumes that there is a checkout for needles, and then even based on configuration it will automatically commit and push updates using the needle editor. So what we wanted to do is streamline that as well as add new features on top, which are either standing by themselves and adding some features, or as in other cases actually enable us to go forward with a plan which we actually are executing right now. So just a quick outlook is that right now what we're doing is handling the SLE16 maintenance workflows, which have some different models, and depending on which tooling we will be using in the end, we will need to rely on what openQA supports there regarding version control awareness. I would like to highlight some features here and also point to the documentation for the relevant part, because this is a collection of multiple features which are in this group grouped by this saga. So one example is fully version test schedules and configuration settings is also in distri openQA, which is the openQA in openQA test distribution. And so that's why I would actually like to show you how the test repository looks like. And then afterwards, I can show you how that looks like in openQA itself. So if we take a look in the test distribution, then we can see this usual setup of an openQA test distribution with the tests and lib folders. So nothing extraordinary there. So just take a look. We have some simple either Perl or Python modules. So let me show you this module. That's really like standard. We import something from the test API, define a run method, and then implement all those calls. What is important is that we have one additional file which is called scenario definitions, and scenario definitions define all the relevant configurations for scheduling the tests, defining what kind of tests are scheduled using those test modules. Okay, so based on that, what you can see is everything is in Git, and we see the settings pointing back to this repository where openQA should read from. So that's pointing to the distribution which we are currently in, which is the test distributions, but also it's pointing to the needles directory. So, you know, the difference is here in needles. So that's the neighboring sister repository, so to say. This format, if you know job templates YAML format, it looks similar, but it is actually different, as in that this is like a full definition of all the necessary settings, meaning that there is nothing set up in the openQA database to do that, meaning that if we would schedule those tests using this test distribution and this scenario definition file on any openQA instance, regardless if it's openQA, OpenSUSE org, or just a fresh instance that you just spawn out based on container or anything, then all the settings come from this repository. There's nothing that needs to be set up in the database beforehand. We can use YAML features, so you can see here that we are just defining common settings and reuse those in the according jobs. And you can see here in the job templates that we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 scenarios which are defined. And now we can take a look in how this is scheduled. So this is, for example, scheduled by GitHub workflows. So we can take a look into we have static checks and we have commit message checker, and then we have an openQA YAML file. And this one again shows one other feature where we can trigger openQA tests from it. The same or very similar approach would also work for other systems like GitLab CI. And what we can see is in that what we are doing is let's say some special setup depending on how our tests are designed, because what we do is we want to use the latest tumbleweed builds that we find on openQA openSUSE.org and schedule openQA tests based on those. So we look up the openQA API and we try to find the latest published build, and from that we derive the HTTP image which we want to use in a later step. The relevant part for triggering and monitoring, as the name says here, trigger and monitor openQA tests. So what we do here, we use actually a new command. So probably many of you know openQA CLI jobs post command that can still be done. The new schedule command has some additional features. So what we can see here is that we give one additional option which is called monitor. So this is why we schedule jobs, but we monitor the created jobs. So we actually wait until those jobs start and finish. So can you please share a link of the image definition used at line 27? Yeah, so this image here is from the Devil openQA repository. I can share the link, and it's basically just providing the openQA client. So that would come from the, can we find it? What you can see here is that we simply check out the Docker file which we have in the openQA repository. Here you go. And we simply install the openQA client. And trigger tests, it's using the param file option to define the scenario definitions YAML, so the file which I showed in before, and is using the HDD, which is tumbleweed, and then latest build, which we derived from here. As an alternative, one can of course point to any kind of minimum QCOW image that one can get from get.openSUSE.org or manually download openSUSE.org, something like a static link to a juice image. The build is basically derived from our GitHub repo and GitHub ref, so that we have point to that exact commit that trigger testing, and case there is pointing to the current repository and branch, so that this triggers whenever there's any pull request opened and then triggers according openQA and openQA test. Let me show you how this looks like. So all the open pull requests are well, not mergeable right now because the ones that are fine are commonly merged quickly. So we can see there is a problem with the commit message and some other problems there. But actually we have this integration for openQA test and trigger. And it's green means that the according openQA test should be green. But we can also follow a link here and see how it looks like. So it says also history openQA or kurz patch 1. So it's actually test for this pull request before merge, and we can see the according test results. Now let's take a look. I'm just picking any job. How does this look like in settings? So in settings, we can see with the case the variable that we're pointing to this distribution and that branch. So you can, this could be your fork or could be any production repository. The build is also specific here. We can see that HDD was this dynamic resolution of a build number to find the latest build at that time. We have the needles repository. I didn't change needles, so this can just be the production needles repository. And the schedule of all the tests, as you can see here, was derived from the scenario definitions files, as we have seen. Now, we can also schedule according production jobs. So what we do is we use the very same scenario definitions, but just from this master branch, and we schedule those in the openQA and openQA job group. We have multiple in there. Let me just show you the main group, which is openQA. So again, 6 scenarios. Those are just the same as we have seen before. And let me show you in there, if we really go to the openQA job group and take a look, you can see that there's nothing in here. So, the settings really come from each and every job. Now I would like to show you other related features, which are also relying on this built-in Git support. And for that, I think it would be helpful if you find a failing job. So luckily we have, sometimes we even do have failures of this openQA and openQA test. So if we go to this job, it's actually an incomplete, which is timeout exceeded. So what information do we have available here? So this one ran into max job time. I don't know what the reason was, but what we can do is for investigation, of course, we have the video, we have the log file and all that. We also have the past JSON file. So this is always there for every job. And in settings, we know that we have this case here, so specifying this branch. It doesn't specify a commit because we just want to take the latest from this repository. And all the low-level details are available in JSON. So what we actually do is we read out the git hashes. So this is why you can see, for example, needles git hash. This was the exact git commit which was actually used, as well as the test git hash. And with test git hash, we can see that this was the exact commit that was used for testing. Now, one more thing relating to investigating. If we find next to an incomplete any failure, okay, I'm sorry, we have very stable tests. magnetizing for you if I scroll through this list. Let's take a look what we still have. So we have one failure here. And additional features which are also part of that saga is that, well, now knowing that information, like having test git hash and needles git hash in there, which we actually already have for years. I just want to, for the sake of completeness, I would like to wrap up this topic and show what's all possible. We can also use additional tooling. And one additional tooling is that we have automated investigation jobs. Okay, I can see now that because this is like a month old is maybe not a good example. Actually, let's go to just the latest Tumbleweed build. And let's take a look. So you can see all these different kind of failures. We have bugs, we have closed bugs, we have test issues and such. In some case, we only have like specific comments. So let's take a look in here. This might be some interesting example. What I'm looking for is a recent failure. Yeah. So we have automatic investigation jobs. Those are actually done by an external script living in the GitHub or in scripts repository. And what is done there is that we can trigger certain scripts defined in the openQA configuration whenever a job finishes, like goes to done or reaches a certain result, like failed or incomplete or passed. Okay? And what we have configured for here is scripts which I can point to. As I said, it's a scripts repository, and the according section in the README describing that is this one. And what is done here is that we do multiple things. We do look to take a look like, does the job fail in the very same module in before? Then normally there would be a carryover bug reference. If not, we call openQA auto review, which is looking in configured ticket trackers. In that case, for example, Progress Open Source org, looking for regex, special regex in this format in ticket subjects. And if any of those matches, then we would put this ticket reference into the job. If that doesn't find anything, then we call actually openQA investigate. And what investigate does is that it can trigger jobs for investigation. So we just try a retry, like maybe this was a fluke, maybe this is a sporadic issue. So we want to find out, does that actually reproduce? And so we, that's the same as if you would click the restart job, but it's not recorded as a clone, but outside as an external reference, so it doesn't pollute production results. And that one, as you can see, it fails, means like, okay, so this reproduces we can see it as a reproducible issue, right? What we also do is, knowing the git hash of the test code that was used for executing the test, we run the test, but with the older state of the test when tests were still passing. So if we go to next and previous, now they're failing. 2 days ago, they were okay. So what we can do is we can go into this job, go into the JSON, find the git hash of the tests which were used at this time, and we rerun the tests. And it turns out then actually the tests are good. So it could be that actually there's regression from the tests. It could also be that this is still sporadic, or we just ran it on another machine, and that's why it passed. So be sure we do some more cross-checking. We actually try out what if we run the current set of tests but go back to the build of last good, which would be this older tumbleweed build. We still have that available on openQA. And if we do that, then it fails the same. Assuming it fails actually in the same test module, that's just says like, okay, likely it's not a product regression because when we go back to the last good build, which passed in before, the test still fails. And now the last cross-check is last good test and build. And this one additionally is actually also scheduled on the very same worker instance, trying to rule out any kind of infrastructure issues. And when we go back with both of those parameters plus the very same worker, then it's also passing. So it's not like this one worker instance is having problems, right? Because we can run pass tests, the same test scenario on this host. And now we have another invocation of this script or scripts, and they actually evaluate the results as I explained in before. And what it finds is, well, the retry failed, and also the jobs, including the last good tests, are okay, and the last good build still failed. So this is very likely a test issue. Yeah. Plus, openQA has the information in this investigation tab, and you can see a lot of helpful information in here. For example, you can see that, well, as we have already established, the last good was the previous build. The last good as of now is, the first bad, or the current bad is 09. And there were, well, multiple changes. For example, we were running on a different worker. This is why it helps with the worker, the investigation to rule out that the worker doesn't have an impact there. You can see that there are multiple changes to needles, but all in Firefox help menu. And the failure was something about host configuration and containers. So yeah, I consider it unlikely that those needles would have an impact. We also have changes to the test, and there are a lot of commits. And based on the previous investigation and based on, well, there are multiple changes which are not just specifically about, let's say, Firefox or something. Yeah, very likely that this is a test regression and coming from one of those commits. Okay. Now we have shown how we can trigger tests based on scenario definitions. We can use the Git hashes to help with the investigation. One more thing which we can also do combining those concepts is to use the simple create menu. So on every openQA instance, like even if you just install a fresh one, you have this dialog for create test. And there are two menu entries in here, example test and test from scenario definitions. Example test, so this is really just creating one test, and we can put any kind of parameters in there and play around with that and try out scenario definitions, put any additional settings, put any GitHub repo that we like here, and we can just try it out. So let me show you how this works. Can do something like a demo here, test name, simple boot. No, wait, this, what is this? Comma separated test. It allows to create only the specific set of tests from the scenario by specifying the name of test to create specifically. Okay, so simple boot refers to that. I would like to keep that. I will use the example distribution. I would like to call maybe the flavor differently. My flavor, and I guess then should go in here. Any additional setting? Yeah, maybe I want to set who are New line separated. Okay, so that's like this. Oh, and then we have syntax highlighting. Cool. And now I call create test. And what this actually did is tests have been scheduled, check out the product log for details, and going there, and then I find less than a minute ago, Oculus scheduled some tests. So don't be scared. If you set up openQA, you can easily create a simple test, and this does something as a start. I mean, there are always some things to improve. For example, one thing which is not that pretty, already some proposals have been made there, is that so now the only thing pointing to the actual test that is running is this number. And would be nice if this would be a clickable link, obviously. If we go there, then we maybe can find the test already. Oh yeah, here build openGate demo simple boot. Or if I put the number in here, then I will just arrive to the same. So what I can see is that this is outside any job group, so it doesn't pollute production settings. It was a test that was running my flavor. So yeah, this is coming from me. It actually did execute a test, and it has my settings in there. So let's check. It has foo equals bar pointing to the example distribution, which can actually execute a working test because we have needle, which is checking for no bootable device. So yeah, that works. The second option in there was test from scenario definition. So this is also guiding you through it, but you need to fill in a bit more details in here, basically the same as in before, but you have all those pointers here. Now you can, let's say maybe you already have some tests and you want to try out something new or try out parts of the scenario definitions, then now those settings are mandatory. So, we could take them over from before or from any kind of production build, and then schedule settings here. Of course, often it is easier, as is also noted in the documentation, that you just clone an existing test, any example which you say like, okay, this is more or less what I want to do, and just go from there and align it. So with that, I would like to point to the documentation and see how that's covered in here. We have the yeah, just point you to the single instance container. So if you don't have an openQA instance, then one line and you're ready to go. This spawns a container with some instance which you can access with your local browser over those, and then you have access to those buttons which I showed. You can use commands to schedule, like remember the example which I showed you from the example distribution, and using that container, let's say you spawn the container and it is running as is also shown in the video on top, then you can also use the schedule command to trigger a new job, which again is pointing to whatever you want to configure as the test distribution Git repository, including needles, or you can clone jobs. So within that container instance, you would be able to clone, let's say, test number 1 from openQA open-source.org. Okay, that can be combined. So if you want, you can immediately spawn an instance and just clone one existing test. That also works for OpenSUSE and SUSE test. You just need to specify those additional settings so that for Osado-based tests, the test definitions are cloned and provided. If you want to have more details about the triggering test, you can go to the user's guide, which explains the concept of job templates. It also mentions the scenario definitions. However, that far is, not as prominently, because in the future, I would still like it to see standard and more scalable so that it can also be used with big products like database testing, where you have multiple teams, multiple job groups, and working together without unnecessary duplication and such. Finding tests, sharing tests. Yeah, here we go. So you can clone existing jobs, you can spawn new jobs, and you can spawn multiple jobs based on templates with this isos post. And the new way corresponding to that is the schedule command. They already behave the same. It's just that additional parameters like for scenario definitions are, I think, only in the schedule command. Right. If you're interested in the part about the job hooks, so let's just look for job hook. Sorry, was it hook? Yeah. Enable custom hook scripts on job done based on result. So those are the prerequisite for those scripts, which are should pop up in the comment section. And we already have those configured on openQA open-source.org and openQA SUSE, and on Crash New instances, something like that isn't configured, and then you can do that accordingly, and you can put in any custom scripts, like some notify to some external service if AMQP, for example, is not enough. About the CI integration, running openQA jobs as CI checks. So there are two examples mentioned. One is to create and monitor openQA jobs from within the CI runner. So this is the example which I showed you using GitHub workflows in openQA. And that one, well, explains again the examples which I have shown. It allows to configure a lot, but you need to set up, let's say, some lines of scripting. The alternative is there are two alternatives. One is to use webhooks and status reporting. Based on the example of GitHub, that means that you can make GitHub directly trigger openQA, but then you need to have the scenario definitions in a predefined path. So or append a parameter to point to the scenario definition so that it's part of the webhook to trigger the according test. But the integration is, let's say, more streamlined because it's like built in. And we are currently exploring possibilities how this could be used, for example, also for the SUSE SLE16 maintenance workflows, where right now we use QM bots and a QM dashboard because you have the additional metadata, and then they support the additional features, how to aggregate results and then approve in IBS and something. But basically just the standard, you have some kind of version control system which builds a product and you want to test it with openQA and feeds back results, that would be more streamlined using this webhook approach. So we will have to see how far we can get there. There is yet another alternative, which is to run ISO to video directly in the CI runner. So if one doesn't need openQA and basically just needs ISO to video because maybe you develop the test somewhere and you just want to have a really automated pipeline, then it's also possible to just run ISO to video as a standalone tool in CI. we actually also do that if we take a look in the example distribution. This is explained and pointing to its own GitHub workflow definition. So for example, what you can see here is that we use an isolated video container and we just want to run the tests and use the exit status from those test results, meaning like the test run has to finish successfully and all the test modules have to succeed. But there's no graphical output, something. I mean, it does use needle checking, but you don't have a fancy web UI to check the results, obviously. Still, videos and such can be recorded. Yeah, and one more final thing that I wanted to mention, like not immediately related to Git, but in general, the openQA web UI can be used as a test management and reporting platform. And that means you can also host manual results there without needing it to be a pure openQA or audience-based test, okay? So let's say you have some manual testing, then one could simply use this API command, which could also be integrated into other tooling to say, I'm scheduling a test or starting a test, and then one could post comments on that job as well as set the results to done. There wouldn't be any kind of thumbnails or screenshots, obviously, when you do a manual test run, but the overall result is integrated in the overview and in the build overview, same as for any native openQA test. Now I would like to quickly cross-check for other points which we want to achieve. And statistical investigations, probably if you want, you can follow that link. Yeah, with that, I would like to come to you guys. So do you have any notes or questions regarding that complete feature block?
A kind of generic question. I was thinking about like big test repository like Osado, no? That has a lot of different kind of tests. How do you think this kind of feature can be used there? Or generally speaking, how this feature can be adopted in an existing big repository, maybe too big repository?
Yeah, right. Because you say too big. So there is one option to exclude things into external repositories. So this was actually or is a neighboring saga about the plugin hierarchy. We use that in openQA and openKTest as well, so-called wheels. So you see this wheels YAML file, and what you can see it is that is pointing to another thing, and that other thing is actually another repository. So what would be possible is to extract certain components from a test distribution like Osado and put those into a separate helper distribution, which are more easily testable, which are also cached on use. So, you know, if you would trigger 1,000 jobs based on this, based on some test suits, then openQA clones all the related repositories if they don't exist yet locally, but you know, not repeatedly, only once. And what you can see, in here that, for example, we have this launcher which has support for one function which is called start GUI program, and that one is being used in the test distribution. So that could be done to reduce the size of a too big test distribution, as in pull out nice, small, easily maintainable, and high quality plugins. Those plugins can be used for two purposes. They can be used for helper libraries like is the case here, or they can actually also be used to group certain parts of test modules. Let's say if a team says like, well, we actually don't know what's going on in Osado, we will only work in the subfolder anyway. Yeah, you can make this subfolder its own separate Git repository, and include it as a wheel into Osado. And since quite some time, I guess since 3 years or so, originally we tried to include it in Osado, and then there were problems with scalability because it was like repeatedly trying to clone the same, grantedly mini repo, but still running into GitHub API limits or something. But that's not a problem anymore because it is cached. On another note, when we actually let me show you again the openQA and openQA tests, so you can see that those are really scheduled every single hour. Okay, and they also use, if I'm not mistaken, a longer time to get the caching right. But it should be in place now and working, so that whenever we find a path like that, even if it looks at branches or commits, then we actually cache those on the openQA side, so that we are not repeatedly clone the same thing again and again, same as which we clone to the web UI, the central instance, but only when it changes, plus to the workers, and they are only pulling in the changes. That's all usable for Osado as well. The difference is, so the difference is that, let me show you here, because we point to Castia, we can make use of some advanced features. Like if we click on boot, then we are actually pointing to that exact commit that was used of executing the boot monitoring test on the GitHub code view, because this is where it comes from. For Osado, if we do that, because those tests, I mean, they in vars.json, we also read out the git hash, and also the openQA investigate can use of the git hash and clone the according repo. But there are some differences because we don't specify the git repo in Castia. If you take a look here, if you go to bootloader, then, well, this is just a local path, and it's actually not versioned, means that this is like the most recent checkout, not necessarily the same version. So if anybody of you working with Osado would like, you could try to, how would it look like if you run Osado tests using Castia, which many engineers do day by day, but only for the purpose of developing new changes, right? Like create a pull request, some verification job, triggering openQA tests, either manually or automatically using the GitHub integration. That is done 100 times daily. But for the production jobs itself, it doesn't specify the variable yet. I would imagine, or my expectation would be, that this should really just work. It might need some adaptation somewhere, especially for some special tests which do some like magic maybe. So yeah, try it out and test it, but that should scale and work well.
And what about the scenario definition? In the example you shown, there was one file in the root folder of the repository.
Exactly. So that part is something where I mentioned that we want to make it scalable. For example, I mean, obviously, you cannot put all the scenario definitions for Osado into one file, right? That would be not maintainable.
Yes.
Yeah. So we need some way to split it and make it usable, comparable to how current users work with that. For example, I mean, for tumbleweeds, I guess, yeah, we could put this one file, which is, I mean, it's already big, but it's kind of okay. So I guess one could just put that into one scenario definitions file. And instead of pointing to this OpenSUSE tumbleweed file in this job group, point it to an according scenario definition file, including all. Plus, settings in machines, well, okay, machines being probably reused for other products, but medium types, okay? I mean, you could then remove all medium types and maybe tumbleweed specific test suits if such exist from there. So this will work, but so far it's not clear how to share it with other groups. So you wouldn't be able to reuse the same test suits with Leap 16. So that's something that we want to find out. The idea was to, well, use a corresponding representation of test suits in a YAML file, which is also kind of straightforward. And then put the test suit definitions also within the test distribution. And then you can reference the test suits document from the scenario definition from Tumbleweed or Leap or something. So that's a plan which we can follow up with maybe next year.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, but the good thing is that if you would have any, I mean, there are already multiple like a standard test suit based definition. Okay, so this will really like, okay, this needs a definition of test suits in the database. And I'm sure we will be able to find examples which specify test an empty test suit. Products, maybe not in here. Here, this one, okay? Test suit null. So we are not using the test definition from the database. One could put that into a separate scenario definitions file and trigger with that. So it can also be used in parallel or on top. But any kind of leaf definitions, like probably like, yeah, maybe PCI images would be a better start where to do it, because it's not so much ingrained into how all this is tested since 10 plus years, linking to each other. Additions, questions by others, wishes, ideas?
Just one thing about the wheels. Of course, we don't have the very good wheel support to this point, right? So if anything changes in the test code, we can investigate on that and use the latest good, the last good test commit, but we don't consider code from wheels in there. So that
you mean for investigation?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's it's on the same level as packages on the worker host.
Yeah.
There is a command which could be set, which is done as part of the investigation, but it might be a bit expensive. Something like rpm-qa to list all the packages and versions run. So that would be something that need to be tested and monitored properly. And for wheels, yeah, that's a good point.
I guess for wheels we can just also retrieve the Git chars for every wheel.
We use the same mechanism to clone and update those, so it should be not too hard to find out the Git hash and bring it back into the var station of every single job or so. Thing which I can show. Look at my own examples because maybe I was showcasing that feature in there. Right, so here you can see what I did is I created a pull request on Osado. And if you don't know that, you can instruct openQA immediately either in the description, or any reviewer can also do that. You can also ask openQA to clone a certain test plus additional parameters. So I said, please clone this test, but exclude those modules. And then openQA will run that as a verification job. Just to know if you have all the details still available. Here's the clone mentioned job. You can see that this passed. And what? And we are also using this monitoring in here. So this job is cloned into that. Oh, it's still there. Cool. So you can see exclude modules. So this was exactly the command which I did here based on this branch. And then this is monitored and then fed back into the result, and it actually worked. The other one would be trigger and monitor openQA. So also automatically we trigger openQA tests anyway. So if you don't have any other example, you can also take a look into there and then just write a comment on clone. Meaning that if you just want to use a smartphone or a tablet or just want to use a browser, you can interact with openQA really nicely because you can edit stuff using GitHub Web UI if you like. You can even use the code spaces for advanced stuff, and for less advanced stuff, you can just interact with openQA. Just do this, and then openQA can read the comment by you or the reviewer, run tests, and feedback the results. So no need to manually post any verification jobs, no need to manually monitor those, no need for the reviewer to manually check URLs, okay? Yeah, so that's it. Anything else for you guys? That in 2 weeks from now, Marius will lead the topic, which is also related. So you can see it as a bit of a follow-up, but also is specific to what we did recently for QMBot and QM Dashboard, in particular for supporting the SLE 16 maintenance workflows. So the 25th of July, QMBot and QM Dashboard. Until then, see ya and goodbye.